David always had everything handed to him. Born into wealth, he never had to struggle a day in his life. Expensive cars, designer clothes, luxury vacations, he had it all. But along with his money came arrogance. He believed that people without wealth were beneath him. To him, success wasn't about hard work, it was about status. On the other side of the city, Sarah lived a completely different life. She wasn't born rich. She had to work for everything. Juggling two jobs while taking business classes at night, she barely had time to rest. She dreamed of a better future, but life kept throwing obstacles her way. Bills piled up, and job rejections became routine. Sarah worked as a waitress in a small cafe, a job she never complained about. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise, tied her apron, and put on a smile. She wasn't just serving coffee, she was fighting for her dreams. David, on the other hand, never noticed people like Sarah. He was too busy checking his expensive watch or scrolling through his phone to acknowledge those around him. He walked into places expecting special treatment, always looking down on those who served him. One morning, their worlds collided. David stormed into the cafe, phone pressed to his ear, frustration clear on his face. He was running late for a meeting, and patience wasn't his strong suit. Sarah greeted him with a polite smile. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you?" "Just a black coffee, and make it quick," David snapped, barely looking up. Sarah nodded and hurried to prepare his order. The cafe was busy, and she moved as fast as she could. As she handed him the coffee, her hand accidentally shook, spilling a few drops onto the table. David's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious?" he said, his voice loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. I, I'm so sorry," Sarah stammered, grabbing a napkin. David scoffed, shaking his head. "This is exactly why people like you stay stuck in low-paying jobs. You can't even do something as simple as serving coffee." Sarah's face burned with embarrassment. Other customers turned to watch, their eyes filled with pity. David reached into his wallet, pulled out a few bills, and tossed them on the counter. "Keep the change. Maybe you can use it to take a basic service skills class," he sneered before grabbing his coffee and walking out. Sarah stood there, gripping the napkin tightly. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, she took a deep breath, pushed back the tears, and told herself, "One day, I'll prove people like him wrong." Sarah stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge. The cafe buzzed around her, but she barely heard it. The words David had thrown at her echoed in her mind. "People like you stay stuck in low-paying jobs." She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to move. She had always known that some people looked down on her, but hearing it so openly hurt more than she expected. But giving up wasn't an option. That night, after her shift, Sarah went home and opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the dimly lit room as she scrolled through job applications. Marketing assistant, office administrator, business analyst. She applied to all of them. She had a degree in business, even if it had taken her years to complete while working multiple jobs. But every rejection email chipped away at her confidence. She took a deep breath and reminded herself, "This is temporary." Over the next few days, she worked harder than ever. She stayed late at the cafe, helping new employees. She practiced her interview skills in front of the mirror. She studied every night, reading business case studies and improving her skills. One afternoon, as she was wiping down a table, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, expecting another rejection. "Hello, is this Sarah?" a professional voice asked. "Is Xuan—" "Yes, this is she said cautiously. "My name is Mr. Harrison. We reviewed your application and would love to schedule an interview for our manager in training program." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Really? I mean, thank you. Yes, I'd love that." "Great. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely." She ended the call and stared at her phone in disbelief. After months of struggling, she finally had a chance. She clenched her fists and whispered to herself, "I won't waste this opportunity." The next morning, Sarah woke up before her alarm. She ironed her best blouse, tied her hair neatly, and made sure her resume was spotless. As she walked into the corporate office building, she felt small among the tall glass windows and expensive suits. But she straightened her shoulders. She had worked for this moment. The interview went smoothly. Mr. Harrison was impressed with her answers. "You have great experience, Sarah. Hard work and determination are more valuable than a fancy resume." 2 days later, she got the call. "Welcome to the team, Sarah. You're officially our new manager in training." Tears welled in her eyes. This wasn't just a job, it was her first real step toward the life she had dreamed of. Her first few days were overwhelming but exciting. She learned quickly, observing how senior managers handled big decisions. She asked questions, took notes, and proved that she was ready to lead. One morning, she arrived at work early for a meeting. She walked confidently into the conference room, ready to introduce herself to the team she would be overseeing. As she glanced around the room, her breath caught. Sitting at the table, flipping through a report, was a familiar face. David. For a moment, Sarah thought she was imagining it. But no, it was him. The same man who had insulted her at the cafe, looking just as arrogant as ever. But this time, things were different, because now she was his boss. David tapped his pen against the table, clearly impatient. "Who's this new manager, anyway?" he muttered to a colleague. Before anyone could answer, the conference room door opened. Sarah stepped inside, dressed in a sleek business outfit, her posture confident and composed. The CEO, Mr. Harrison, stood up with a smile. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce your new regional manager, Sarah. She'll be overseeing operations starting today." David's pen slipped from his fingers. His eyes widened as he stared at Sarah, his mind racing. No, it couldn't be. Sarah met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She saw the shock in his face, the confusion in his eyes. "Sarah?" He blurted out before he could stop himself. She tilted her head slightly. "Yes. Nice to see you again, David." The room was silent. David's colleagues glanced between them, sensing the tension. Mr. Harrison continued, unaware of the history between them. "Sarah has worked incredibly hard to earn this position. I'm confident she'll bring great leadership to the team." Sarah nodded. "I look forward to working with all of you." David swallowed hard. He had humiliated her just days ago, and now she was in charge. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel powerful. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His confidence, usually so unshakable, wavered under Sarah's steady gaze. The meeting continued, but he barely heard a word. His mind kept replaying their last encounter, the way he had insulted her, tossed money at her like she was nothing. Now she was his boss. As the meeting wrapped up, employees began to leave the conference room. David hesitated, debating whether to slip out quietly, but before he could move, Sarah spoke. "David, a moment." His stomach tightened. He forced a nod and followed her into her new office. The space was modern and polished, with floor-to-ceiling windows. It was clear she belonged here. Sarah sat behind her desk, calm and composed. "I just wanted to check in. You seemed surprised to see me." David cleared his throat. I wasn't expecting it." She nodded, studying him. "I understand, but I want to make one thing clear. I expect professionalism from my team, regardless of our past." David nodded quickly. "Of course." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Good. Let's make sure there are no issues moving forward." David felt a cold sweat on his back. She wasn't holding a grudge. She wasn't throwing his insults back at him. She was handling this with complete professionalism, and that made him feel even worse. David closed the door behind him, his hands clammy. He walked back to his desk, ignoring the curious glances from his colleagues. He sank into his chair, staring at his computer screen but seeing nothing. This was bad. Would she fire him? Would she make his life miserable? He had been awful to her, and now she had every reason to get back at him. He thought about apologizing, but what would he even say? Sorry for treating you like garbage at the cafe? Would she even believe him? The next few days were torture. Every time Sarah walked into the office, David stiffened. He expected a harsh email, a sudden demotion, or an embarrassing call out in front of the team, but it never came. Instead, Sarah was focused on her job. She led meetings with confidence, made smart decisions, and earned the team's respect. David found himself watching her, confused. Why wasn't she taking revenge? Why was she still being professional? And then, something even more unexpected happened. He started respecting her. David had always believed that power belonged to those who took it. He had seen managers rule with fear, making employees feel small just to assert dominance. But Sarah was different. She treated everyone with respect, something David had never valued before. During team meetings, she listened to every idea, even from junior employees. She gave credit where it was due. She worked late, not because she had to, but because she wanted the company to succeed. She didn't lead with arrogance, she led with confidence. One day, Sarah called David into her office again. He braced himself, expecting bad news. David, I want to give you a new project, she said, sliding a file across the desk. David blinked. Wait, you want me to lead this? She nodded. You have experience in this area. I think you'll do well. David hesitated. Are you sure? Sarah leaned back in her chair. I believe in second chances. I know what it's like to be underestimated. David stared at her, struggling to process what was happening. She wasn't punishing him. She wasn't using her position to make him feel small. Instead, she was giving him an opportunity. For the first time in years, David felt something unfamiliar. Gratitude. David left Sarah's office with the project file in his hands, but his mind was elsewhere. He sat at his desk, staring at the pages, but all he could think about was how different she was from him. If the roles had been reversed, if he had been the one to become her boss, he knew exactly what he would have done. He would have humiliated her, reminded her every day of her place. But Sarah? She did the opposite. She had every reason to hold a grudge. Instead, she gave him a chance. Over the next few weeks, David found himself looking at things differently. He paid attention to how Sarah treated people, the way she encouraged her team, the way she handled problems with patience instead of frustration. He noticed how employees trusted her, how they wanted to work harder because they respected her leadership. And he realized something he had never admitted before. He had been wrong. Not just about Sarah, but about everything. For years, he had believed that wealth made him better than others. That status was the most important thing. That people like Sarah, who worked low-paying jobs, were beneath him. But now he saw the truth. Character mattered more than money. Respect was earned, not bought. And Sarah, the woman he had insulted without a second thought, was now someone he admired. For the first time in his life, David felt ashamed of the person he had been. And he knew there was only one thing left to do. David stood outside Sarah's office, his heart pounding. Apologizing wasn't something he was used to. He had always avoided admitting when he was wrong, but this time he had no choice. He knocked softly. "Come in," Sarah's voice called. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Do you have a minute?" Sarah looked up, curious. "Of course. What's on your mind?" David took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." She raised an eyebrow. "For what?" He exhaled sharply. "For how I treated you at the cafe. I was rude, disrespectful, and completely out of line." He swallowed. "I judged you without knowing anything about you, and I was wrong." Sarah studied him for a moment. "You don't have to say this, David." "But I do," he insisted. "I've spent my whole life thinking money made me better than other people, but watching you lead this team, seeing how you treat people with respect, it made me realize how wrong I was." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. David shifted nervously. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just wanted you to know that I see things differently now, and I'm sorry. A small smile tugged at the corner of Sarah's lips. Thank you for saying that. David let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. She nodded toward the file on his desk. And about that project, are you ready to prove what you can do? David straightened. Yes, and this time, I won't take anything for granted. As he left her office, he felt something new. Not just relief, but a sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, he wanted to be better. Not because of money, not because of status, but because he had finally learned what real success meant.